Dad left me heartbroken with one old horse. 6 months later, I proved everyone wrong. The heat in Elk Creek, New Mexico hits you like a slap from an angry god. I'm talking about the kind of heat that melts asphalt into black soup and makes your boots stick to the pavement with every step. The sun wasn't just hot that morning. It was downright vindictive, like it had a personal grudge against anyone foolish enough to be walking around at 9 a.m. in July. My name's Logan Reed, and I was 36 years old when my world got turned upside down faster than a tumbleweed in a tornado. Standing there in front of that little notary office, sweat dripping down my temples under my weathered cowboy hat, I could smell everything wrong with that day. Dry hay mixed with a distant scent of mesquite trees. The kind of smell that usually meant home. Today it smelled like the end of everything I'd ever known. 20 years ago, this same street looked completely different. Hell, I looked completely different too. Back then, I was just some 16-year-old kid with dreams bigger than Texas and a daddy who seemed like he could move mountains with his bare hands. Dad used to bring me here every month to handle ranch business, and I'd sit in that same parking lot, windows down, listening to him talk about responsibility and legacy. Son, he'd always say, adjusting his own beat-up Stetson, inheritance isn't just about land. It's about history, and you don't squander history. Thomas Reed was old school, the kind of man whose word was stronger than any contract you could sign. When he made a promise, you could bet your last dollar on it. So naturally, I figured his final promise would be just as solid as everything else about him. Boy, was I wrong. Something felt off the moment I walked into that office. Maybe it was the way the receptionist couldn't quite meet my eyes, or how the air conditioning seemed to be working overtime, like it was trying to freeze out more than just the New Mexico heat. There was this tension hanging in the air, thick enough to cut with a butter knife. Mr. Donovan, the family lawyer, looked like he'd aged about 10 years since Dad's funeral 3 weeks prior. His gray suit was rumpled, and his hand shook slightly as he shuffled through the papers. The man had been handling Reed family business for over 30 years, and I'd never seen him look this uncomfortable. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice dry as desert sand, "we're here for the reading of the last will and testament of Thomas Reed, dated March 15th, 2024. My brother Cole was already there, naturally, 3 years older than me, with that same smug expression he'd worn since we were kids fighting over the last piece of Mom's apple pie. He was leaning back in his chair like he already knew what was coming. Fingers drummed against the armrest in a rhythm that made my teeth itch. Mr. Donovan cleared his throat and began reading in that official, funeral director voice that lawyers seemed to perfect in law school. "I, Thomas Reed, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare and publish this as my last will and testament." The words started flowing like molasses, all that legal mumbo-jumbo about assets and bequests. Then came the hammer blow. I devised and bequeathed the Red Mesa Ranch, including all 2,847 acres, the main house, all outbuildings, equipment, and 200 head of cattle, to my eldest son, Cole Reed. My heart didn't just sink. It cratered, like the ground had given way under my boots. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Dad had always talked about the ranch being our family legacy, something we'd work together. All those conversations about carrying on the Reed name, about building something lasting. But Mr. Donovan wasn't finished. Oh no, he had one more punch to throw. To my younger son, Logan Reed, I bequeathed one Appaloosa gelding, age 15, registered name Ghost Paint, along with all his tack and equipment. The room went dead silent. Cole's drumming stopped. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. One horse. One old, 15-year-old horse. I felt like someone had just driven a rusty nail straight through the heart of that kid I used to be. The one who dreamed about expanding the herd, maybe adding some quarter horses to the operation. The kid who thought his daddy's word was gospel. Dad had always been about fairness, about rewarding hard work. I'd spent every summer since I was 12 working that ranch, learning every inch of fence line, every watering hole, every head of cattle. So why did this feel like he'd just ridden me off completely? Sometimes the strongest blows don't come from enemies or strangers. They come from the people you love most, the ones you trust without question. Those that don't leave scars on your skin. They leave burned-out craters in your soul. Cole couldn't contain himself any longer. He leaned over toward me with this sick grin spreading across his face, like he just won the lottery and got revenge on his worst enemy all in one day. "Oh, Logan, brother." His voice was dripping with fake concern, but I could taste the poison underneath. "You always said you wanted freedom, right? Well, now you got it, and that old gelding to go with it. Take him off my hands, will you? I ain't paying for oats for some worn-out horse." My fists clenched so tight, my fingernails drew blood from my palms. The physical pain was nothing compared to the fire burning in my chest. Every muscle in my body wanted to stand up and show Cole exactly what this dreamer could do with his fists. But something inside me, maybe the part that really did come from Dad, knew better. Real strength isn't in the explosion. It's in the calm before the storm. Cole kept going, because of course he did. "Face it, Logan. You were never a real cowboy anyway. More like a dreamer. And dreams don't pay the bills out here." I almost laughed. "Almost? Dreamer? Sure, I dreamed that my own father wouldn't throw me off the side of the road with some old horse. Maybe that was the most ambitious dream of my entire life. The silence that followed was the kind you feel in your bones. Not peaceful quiet. The heavy, electric kind that comes right before lightning strikes. I could feel Cole waiting for me to explode, to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down right there in that stuffy office. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Not yet, anyway. Instead, I stood up slowly, tipped my hat to Mr. Donovan, and walked out of that office with what little dignity I had left. My boots echoed against the tile floor like a funeral march, and I could hear Cole's satisfied chuckle following me all the way to the parking lot. The drive back to the ranch felt like traveling through a different dimension. Roads I'd driven 1,000 times suddenly looked foreign, like I was seeing them through someone else's eyes. The Red Mesa Ranch had always been the end destination, the place where everything made sense. Now it felt like I was driving toward my own execution. The barn looked different too. Maybe it was just my mood, but everything seemed run down, neglected. Cobwebs hung from the rafters like funeral decorations for dead dreams. The feed bins that always use overflow with fresh hay were half empty, collecting dust and mouse droppings. The whole place smelled like disappointment and broken promises. That's where I found him. Ghost Paint, standing in the far corner of his stall, like he was trying to make himself invisible. 15 years old, which in horse years made him somewhere between a senior citizen and a museum piece. His coat was still that distinctive Appaloosa pattern, white with dark spots scattered across his hindquarters like someone had flicked paint at him with a brush. But his eyes looked as defeated as I felt. Looking at him brought back this memory that hit me like a freight train. I was 10 years old, full of energy and absolutely convinced I was going to be the next rodeo champion. My first pony, a little paint mare named Buttercup, had just thrown me harder than a mechanical bull a honky-donk. I was lying there in the dirt, knee bleeding, pride shattered into about 1,000,000 pieces. Dad didn't yell at me or tell me I should have been more careful. He just walked over, extended his hand, and said those words that I'd carried with me ever since. "Cowboys never quit, son. Never. And a good cowboy always gets back on the horse, no matter how many times he falls." Standing there in that dusty stall, those words felt like the universe's idea of a cruel joke. Get back on the horse? This was the only horse I had left, and he looked about as ready for another ride as I felt ready for another round of family disappointment. The contrast was almost funny, if anything about this situation could be called funny. 10-year-old Logan had boundless hope and a father who seemed to believe in second chances. 36-year-old Logan had one old horse and a growing suspicion that his father's final lesson was about giving up gracefully. I stared at Ghost Paint for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. All I could think was one word. Finished. The ranch was finished for me. My future plans were finished. This horse was just another burden. Another reminder that I'd somehow managed to lose everything that mattered. So I did what any practical man would do. I pulled out my phone and called Jake Morrison, a livestock trader who specialized in what the industry politely calls culling. Jake's voice was as flat and emotionless as always when he answered. Logan Reed. I said, try and keep my own voice steady. Got an old gelding here. 15 years, sound but not much use anymore. Appaloosa? Jake's tone suggested he already knew this wasn't going to be a profitable conversation. Yeah, $200, and I'll pick him up tomorrow. $200. I spent more than that on a decent pair of work boots. What's the value of a life when you can price it out like a pair of worn-out shoes? The number sat in my stomach like a stone. Ghost Paint wasn't just a horse. He was the last connection I had to the life I thought I was building. But what choice did I have? Deal. I heard myself say, though the word tasted like sawdust. I was all set to hang up when Jake added, I'll be by around noon with the trailer. Have him ready. The weight of what I'd just done settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I wasn't just selling a horse. I was betraying the last piece of my father's legacy. The last thing that connected me to the man who'd taught me that cowboys never quit. Apparently, this cowboy was about to quit in a big way. I walked into Ghost Paint's stall to start removing his tack, moving like a robot going through program motions. The old leather saddle that had probably been on his back more times than I could count. The worn bridle with silver conchos that caught what little light filtered through the dusty windows. That's when my fingers brushed against something unexpected. There was a small leather pouch attached to the saddlebag, so faded and worn I'd never really noticed it before. Inside, my fingers found something crinkled and stiff. I pulled out what looked like an old receipt, yellow with age and barely legible. Veterinary clinic, $28, crypt surgery, 2009. But it was a handwritten note at the bottom that made my heart skip. Bloodline SCDS-#14. A true champion in the making. My hands were shaking as I reached deeper into the pouch and found something else. A small piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times it was practically falling apart. When I opened it, I recognized Dad's handwriting immediately. He's not just a horse. He's your chance. If you're reading this, it's not too late. Below that, there was a copy of a separate gift deed, signed by Dad while he was still alive, dated just 6 months before he passed. It clearly separated Ghost Paint from the ranch assets, listing him as a personal gift to me specifically. My heart, which had been sitting in my stomach like a dead weight, suddenly jumped back to life. Crypt surgery? Champion bloodline? Dad's secret note written while he was still healthy? He hadn't abandoned me. He'd left me a puzzle. A treasure map written in veterinary receipts and legal documents. Ghost Paint wasn't just some old horse. He was the ember in the fire that had been burning in my soul, the one I thought had died completely when I heard that will. I looked at Ghost Paint with completely new eyes. Those sad, defeated eyes I'd seen just minutes before now seemed to hold something else. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was determination. Or maybe it was just my own hope reflecting back at me. But for the first time since I'd walked out of that lawyer's office, I felt like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. What if worthless wasn't the final destination, but the starting gate? What if Dad hadn't just left me an old horse, but a key to something bigger? Maybe even the answer to why he'd done what he did in the first place. What if this key was my last hope? I pulled out my phone and called Jake Morrison back. Jake? Logan Reed again. Cancel that pickup. The horse is off the market. There was a pause. You sure about that, Logan? I can't guarantee that price will hold if you change your mind again. I'm sure, I said, looking into Ghost Paint's eyes. This old boy and I have some unfinished business. As I hung up the phone, I could swear Ghost Paint's ears perked up just a little. Maybe he sensed the change in my mood, or maybe he'd been listening to the whole conversation and understood more than I gave him credit for. Either way, we weren't finished. Not by a long shot. I had a puzzle to solve, a mystery to unravel, and apparently a champion to find buried somewhere inside this old horse. The journey ahead was completely unknown, maybe dangerous, definitely unpredictable. But for the first time in weeks, that unknown felt like possibility instead of defeat. The real question was I ready for whatever came next? After the will reading, I had no answers, just a vet receipt and a ghost of a horse. Sleeping in that truck had done a number on my back. Cheap motels were only slightly better, but at least they had hot water. I hadn't had a real address since the will reading. A week later, I was driving ghost paint down Highway 287 through the endless Texas prairie, where the horizon melts into the sky like butter on hot toast. The landscape stretched out forever in every direction. Nothing but grassland and the occasional oil pump nodding like a mechanical prayer. This was cattle country, the kind of place where every mile marker tells a story about somebody's dream or somebody's failure. I was heading to see Martha Blake, a 70-year-old woman. They called the horse Whisper of the South. If you had a broken-down racehorse or a stallion that had lost his will to run, Martha was your last hope before the glue factory. Her place wasn't some fancy Kentucky farm with white fences and manicured lawns. It was a working ranch where every fence post had character, and every barn had seen more comebacks than a country music singer. The smell hit me before I even got out of the truck. Horse liniment mixed with fresh hay and old leather. The kind of scent that takes you back to childhood faster than your mother's apple pie. Martha's ranch looked like it had been there since before Texas was even a state, and knowing Martha, it probably had been. She was waiting for me by the main barn, arms crossed, wearing jeans that had seen more honest work than most people see in a lifetime. Martha Blake had the kind of weathered face that comes from 50 years of dealing with 1,000-pound animals and their equally stubborn owners. But her eyes were sharp as a tack and missed nothing. "So you're Tom Reed's boy," she said, giving Ghost Paint a long, appraising look. "Heard about the reading. That brother of yours always was meaner than a rattlesnake, with a toothache." I pulled out the veterinary receipt and Dad's note, hands shaking slightly as I handed them over. Martha read everything twice, her expression giving away absolutely nothing. She looked at me, then at Ghost Paint, then back at the papers. "You brought me a story, son," she finally said, "and stories deserve a chance." Then she cracked that first smile, and it was like watching the sun come up after the longest night of your life. "What did your daddy leave you? A Christmas present." And here I thought he was a practical one. Maybe this is his idea of a joke. Problem is, none of us are laughing yet. I couldn't help but grin back, even with everything falling apart around me. "Martha, if Cole hears Ghost Paint's worth something, he'll come sniffing around like a coyote near a chicken coop." Her expression turned serious real quick. Then, "Keep quiet. Around here, secrets are worth more than land titles." But Martha wasn't laughing when she started examining Ghost Paint. She moved around him like a detective gathering evidence, her experienced hands finding old scars, testing muscles, checking joints. The horse stood perfectly still, like he understood this was his job interview for a second chance at life. After what felt like forever, Martha stood up and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in anyone's eyes for weeks. "Hope. He's old Logan, but those lungs are like a marathon runner's. And these bones." She shook her head in amazement. "I've never seen bones this solid on a horse's age. This is pure Secretariat bloodline, on the dam side. He was gelded to preserve the valuable genetics, not for sale. This horse is a treasure. Your daddy knew exactly what he was doing. He left you a genuine athlete that just needs proper conditioning." Martha's words hit me like cool water on parched earth. Dad, he hadn't abandoned me after all. Ghost Paint wasn't just a horse. He was a second chance, disguised in scars and silence. In the first 2 weeks, Martha worked with Ghost Paint like a master craftsman restoring a classic car. Groundwork, massages, careful feeding schedules, building up muscle tone that had been dormant for years. I watched every session, learning more about horses in 2 weeks than I had in my entire life. Finally, Martha brought Ghost Paint to track for a real look at what he still had left in the tank. When Martha dropped her flag, Ghost Paint started slow, real slow, but something changed at the halfway mark. His stride lengthened, his pace picked up, and suddenly he wasn't just keeping up, he was gaining ground. On the final 100 yards, something magical happened. Ghost Paint found another gear that none of us knew existed. He passed one horse, then another, his hooves eating up ground like he was 20 years old again. He crossed the finish line second, just a nose behind a 4-year-old thoroughbred that was supposed to be in his prime. Martha was grinning like she just struck oil in her backyard. See that? He's not a sprinter, he's a stayer. This horse can go the distance. Word started getting around the local racing community. A scout from one of the regional breeding operations showed up, didn't say much, but he took notes. Lots of them. For the first time in weeks, I started thinking we might actually have something real here. Not just hope, but genuine possibility. That's when reality decided to remind me that hope and progress have a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. 3 weeks after the test run, I had to go back to the ranch to pick up Dad's old feed barrel, the one with the dent from when he punched it in 1993 yelling about hay prices. Just some sentimental junk. But it was all I had left of him. Maybe word got out. Small towns have big mouths. And someone must have told Cole that the junk horse wasn't looking so junky anymore. That's when I discovered just how far Cole was willing to go to make sure I stayed down. The water had been shut off to the pasture where I'd been keeping some of my things. Not broken, shut off. And there was a nice shiny truck from Animal Welfare Services parked right in front of the main gate. I noticed Cole had left a half-empty water bucket by the fence, probably to make it look like I'd been neglecting animals. The inspector was a tired-looking man in his 50s who clearly didn't want to be there any more than I wanted him there. He handed me a clipboard with the kind of official paperwork that makes your stomach drop into your boots. Citation for inadequate animal care facilities. He said in a voice that had delivered bad news too many times to count. 24 hours to remedy the violation, or face a $10,000 fine. This had Cole written all over it. Maybe he didn't even care that ghost paint wasn't there anymore. He just wanted a paper trail. Something to stick me with. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Cole didn't want the ranch. He wanted to erase me from it completely, to prove that I was as worthless as he'd always said I was. Cole was like kudzu. He didn't just want to grow. He wanted to choke out everything else around him so nothing could thrive except him. Jealousy is poison. It doesn't just destroy the person who feels it. It tries to infect everyone and everything in its path. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching me crumble. Not this time. I had 24 hours to move Ghost Paint somewhere safe, somewhere Cole couldn't touch him. I called Martha in a panic. She wiped sweat from her brow and looked tired. Logan, I've done all I can. But there's a man in Oklahoma. Raul, he can take this horse where I can't. Raul Mendez, she continued, best rehabilitation trainer in the Southwest. He specializes in bringing broken champions back from the dead. If anyone can help your horse reach his potential, it's Raul. That night, I loaded Ghost Paint into the trailer and hit the road. The headlights carved twin lines through the Oklahoma dark like spurs through leather. The radio was playing some old Johnny Cash song about redemption and second chances, and every word felt like it was written specifically for me. Lost ranch, lost family, lost direction. But maybe, just maybe, not lost hope. I'd spent my whole life thinking cowboys only needed grit and good boots. Turns out, they need science in strangers too. I pulled into Raul's place just after sunrise, and it looked like something out of a science fiction movie. This wasn't some dusty old ranch like Martha's. This was a high-tech equine rehabilitation center that looked like it could bring a mummy back to life. Raul Mendez was a quiet man in his 40s with deep, thoughtful eyes that seemed to see things other people missed. His facility had equipment I'd only heard about in whispered conversations at livestock auctions, hyperbaric chambers for tendons, underwater treadmills, diagnostic equipment that cost more than most people's houses. When I showed him the veterinary receipt, Raul studied it like he was reading ancient scripture. This doctor, he said slowly, Dr. Alonso, he was a genius, specialist in champion bloodlines. He never worked with ordinary horses, only the special ones. This confirms what you already suspected. Logan, your father wasn't protecting just any horse. He was protecting a genuine diamond. Standing there in that high-tech barn, watching Raul examine Ghost Paint with the reverence of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact, I felt something shift inside me. This place felt different. It felt like possibility. It felt like maybe we really could turn this crazy situation into something extraordinary. For the next 6 weeks, Ghost Paint responded beautifully to Raul's rehabilitation program. His muscle tone was improving, his stamina was building, and for the first time in years, he looked like a real athlete again. The transformation was incredible, like watching a ghost regain its flesh and fire. By week 4 of the program, the same scout from the breeding operation came by again, this time a little more interested. He watched Ghost Paint work for an hour, making more notes in his little leather book. I was walking on air. This was it. This was the validation we'd been working toward. But just as week 6 of the rehabilitation rolled in, right when hope had started to feel like a plan, everything changed. Ghost Paint was in the middle of his best workout, yet when I heard the crack, sharp final, like a rifle shot across my chest, my legs forgot how to move, but my body ran anyway. I was running before I even realized what had happened, my boots slipping on the track surface as I scrambled to reach him. The sound of Ghost Paint hitting the ground was like watching my father die all over again. The veterinarian's diagnosis hit me like a sledgehammer. Superficial flexor tendon strain. 95% of horses with this injury never race competitively again. Never race again. The words echoed in my head. I felt the ground giving way beneath my feet. Was this it? Was this the end of everything we'd been working toward? Had all those hopes and dreams been nothing but smoke and mirrors? The despair was so heavy I could barely breathe. For a moment, all I could think about were Dad's words about cowboys never giving up and how they felt like the universe's cruelest joke. But then Raoul did something unexpected. Instead of delivering more bad news or suggesting we consider our options, he sat down next to me in the stall where Ghost Paint was resting. "Logan," he said quietly, "I've seen a lot of horses in my time. Some give up at the first sign of trouble. Others fight until there's nothing left to fight with. This horse's heart." He paused, looking at Ghost Paint with the kind of respect you reserve for wounded soldiers. 3 to 6 months minimum, Raoul said. If everything heals clean, if nothing else flares up. I won't lie, it's a long shot, but I've seen long shots come in before. Raoul's words weren't just a promise. They were a challenge, a call to action, to belief, to the kind of fight that separates the survivors from the quitters. I looked at Ghost Paint lying there in the straw, his breathing labored, but his eyes still holding that spark of defiance I'd come to recognize. It was like he was saying, "We're not finished yet." I didn't know if I had 6 months of fight in me, but Raoul looked like the kind of man who could turn a pile of rocks into a racehorse if you gave him enough time. Ghost Paint seemed to have already accepted his fate, like an old soldier accepting one more battle. That night, I sat in the stall with Ghost Paint, holding ice packs against his injured leg and feeling his warm breath on my hands. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls and the distant hum of the highway. "If you get up," I whispered to him, "we get up together, not just back on the track. We get up from the ashes. I'm not the Logan who used to have everything handed to him anymore. I'm the Logan who fights. And this fight is for both of us, for your future and for my past, which I'm finally starting to see in a new light." Ghost Paint had become more than just a horse to me. He'd become my own shadow, leading me forward into something I couldn't see yet, but was finally ready to trust. That silent promise, made to an old horse in a dark stable, became the most important oath of my entire life. The real question wasn't whether Ghost Paint would recover from his injury. The real question was whether we'd both be strong enough to handle whatever came after he did. 2 months later, I was standing at the rail of Louisiana Downs, watching Ghost Paint walk onto the track like he owned the place. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixed with the sweet scent of mint juleps and the nervous sweat of gamblers checking their programs one last time. The crowd was buzzing with that electric energy you only get at a racetrack, where fortunes change faster than the weather, and dreams either take flight or crash into the dirt. This wasn't some backyard test run anymore. This was the real deal, a qualifying race that could punch our ticket to the big leagues. Ghost Paint looked different than he had just months ago. His coat gleamed like polished copper, his muscles rippled with power that had been sleeping for years, and his eyes held that focused intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. The track announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker as the horses lined up at the gate. Ghost Paint was listed as a 15-1 long shot, which was probably generous considering most people figured an old horse had about as much chance of winning as a snowball in a Texas summer. But I knew something they didn't. This wasn't just any old horse. This was a machine that had been rebuilt from the ground up by some of the best trainers in the business, powered by bloodlines that trace back to legends, and driven by something even more powerful than genetics, pure, stubborn determination. The gates flew open with a metallic crash that sent 12 horses exploding onto the track like rockets. Ghost Paint started exactly the way I expected him to, dead last, trotting along like he was out for a Sunday ride, while the other horses shot ahead like their tails were on fire. For the first quarter mile, I thought maybe we got ahead of ourselves. Maybe all that rehabilitation had just turned him into an expensive pet. But then something clicked. Maybe it was a sound of hooves pounding the earth that triggered some ancient memory buried deep in his DNA. Maybe it was the roar of the crowd that reminded him what he was born to do. Whatever it was, Ghost Paint suddenly found that extra gear we'd seen glimpses of in training. By the halfway point, he was no longer dead last. He'd passed 2 horses, then 3, his stride lengthening with every step like he was just getting warmed up. The crowd started to notice, their chatter rising to a buzz of confusion and excitement. Number 7, Ghost Paint, making a move on the outside. The announcer called, his voice carrying just a hint of surprise. But Ghost Paint wasn't done. With 3 furlongs to go, he shifted into a gear I didn't even know he had. His hooves ate up ground like he was running downhill instead of on the flat. And suddenly the horses that had left him in their dust were looking over their shoulders, wondering where this veteran had come from. The final furlong was pure magic. Ghost Paint blew past horse after horse like they were standing still, his jockey barely having to move as the horse found his rhythm and locked on the finish line, like a heat-seeking missile. The crowd was on their feet now, screaming for this impossible underdog story unfolding right in front of their eyes. He crossed the finish line second, just 0.3 of a second behind the favorite, a 4-year-old thoroughbred named Lightning Strike, who was supposed to be the next big thing. The track announcer completely lost his composure. I don't believe my eyes. This veteran just shocked the entire South. Where did this comeback story come from? My eyes were full of tears of joy, relief, and pure pride. He'd done it. We'd done it. I could feel a wave of warm, clean happiness spreading through my body like bourbon on a cold night. Ghost Paint wasn't just a horse anymore. He was living proof that miracles happen when you refuse to give up on them. Sometimes the loudest victories aren't won on the highest podium. They're won in the moment when you prove to yourself that you didn't break, that your faith wasn't foolish, and that the people who wrote you off were dead wrong. The crowd was going absolutely crazy, and I realized that half of them probably had no idea what they'd just witnessed. They'd seen an old horse run fast, but I'd seen a phoenix rise from ashes. Within hours, someone had uploaded a video of the race to social media, and by the next morning, it had gone completely viral. Fox Sports picked up the story with a segment called Old Man Horse, Young Man Dream, and before I knew it, my phone was ringing off the hook with reporters wanting interviews. Suddenly, I was famous. Not for wealth, not for fame, just for believing when no one else did. There was something beautifully ironic about that. It was like the whole world had decided that an old horse was the new rock and roll. The media attention was overwhelming, but also intoxicating. Every major sports network wanted a piece of the story, and social media was exploding with people sharing their own comeback stories. I started getting calls from sponsors, from other horse owners, from people who just wanted to shake my hand and tell me they'd been rooting for the underdog all along. It felt good to finally have something positive to talk about instead of explaining why my brother had screwed me over. But success has a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention, and Cole was watching all of this unfold with the kind of expression you'd see on someone who just swallowed a mouthful of vinegar. I caught a glimpse of him in a newspaper photo from some local business event, and his face looked like he'd been sucking on lemons for a week. His eyes were narrow with rage, his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack walnuts, and I could practically feel the jealousy radiating off the page. 3 days after our moment of triumph, a process server showed up at Raul's facility with an envelope that made my blood run cold. Cole had filed a lawsuit in Rio Arriba County Court, case number 24, CV 913, demanding 50% of all future earnings from Ghost Paint. His argument was legal nonsense wrapped in expensive lawyer language, but was crafted just well enough to cause me serious problems. He claimed that since Ghost Payne had lived on ranch property, he was part of the immovable property complex, and that any increase in his value had been achieved using ranch resources. It was complete garbage, but it was the kind of garbage that could tie me up in court for months or even years. Worse yet, if the judge sided with Cole, Ghost Payne could be seized as disputed property. That wasn't just legal maneuvering. That was my worst nightmare with a court stamp on it. Reading that lawsuit felt like getting hit in the head with a sledgehammer. Cole couldn't just let me have this one thing, could he? His jealousy was like a cancer that had to destroy everything it touched just to feel better about itself. This was no longer a horse race. It was a battle for legacy, and proof that greed can try to steal even the dreams we rebuild from dust. The worst part was the timing. We were finally getting somewhere, finally proving that Dad's faith in Ghost Payne had been justified, and Cole had to come along and try to destroy it all because he couldn't stand seeing me succeed. But I wasn't the same broken-down guy who'd walked out of that lawyer's office months ago. I'd learned a few things about fighting back, and I had ammunition that Cole didn't know about. I met with my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in agricultural and property law. When I laid out all my evidence, the separate gift deed Dad had signed, the veterinary records proving Ghost Payne's championship bloodline, and most importantly, the security camera footage of Cole sabotaging the water supply, her eyes lit up like she'd just been dealt a royal flush. Dad had been thinking 3 moves ahead, just like he always did. He hadn't just left me a horse. He'd left me a complete legal fortress, with every document I'd need to protect what was rightfully mine. It was like Dad had anticipated this exact scenario and had spent his final months setting traps for Cole's greed. The gift deed was ironclad, dated months before Dad's death and witnessed by the bank president. The veterinary records proved Ghost Payne's value had nothing to do with ranch resources and everything to do with genetics that had been sleeping in his DNA for years. Who would have thought that an old cowboy's habit of keeping every receipt would turn out to be better detective work than anything the county courthouse had ever seen? I felt like I was finally understanding the chess game Dad had been playing all along. Every piece was falling into place exactly the way he'd planned it. The lawsuit did one thing Cole probably hadn't counted on. It made the story even bigger. Suddenly, this wasn't just about an old horse making a comeback. This was about family betrayal, greed, and the question of whether someone could literally steal another person's dreams through the court system. The hashtag Derby Ultimer started trending on social media, with thousands of people sharing their opinions about the case. Sports journalists were calling it the most compelling horse racing story in decades, and legal experts were weighing in on property rights issues. One tweet from an ESPN reporter perfectly captured the mood. Millions on the line, hearts in the dust. Logan Reed's story is a drama unfolding before our eyes. This is more than sport. It's a modern-day Western. The media attention was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it meant that Cole's legal maneuvering was happening in the full glare of public scrutiny, which might make him think twice about his more underhanded tactics. On the other hand, it put enormous pressure on me to perform when it mattered most. Every sports talk show in the country was debating whether Ghost Payne could actually compete in the Kentucky Derby, and whether the family drama would distract from his performance. The pressure was building like steam in a boiler, and I could feel it threatening to overwhelm everything we'd worked for. But I also realized that this attention was giving me something I'd never had before, a platform to tell the real story about what had happened to our family, and about what my father had really intended when he wrote that will. Then the judge dropped a bombshell that changed everything. Judge Maria Castellanos, who was presiding over the case, announced that due to the complexity of the legal issues and the intense public interest, she was postponing her decision until a day before the Kentucky Derby. She wanted time to review all the evidence thoroughly and make sure her ruling was legally sound. 1 week, 7 days between my legal freedom and my shot at the biggest prize in horse racing. It felt like the universe was testing me, throwing one challenge after another to see if I was really worthy of the gifts I'd been given. The timing was almost cruel in its perfection. I'd have to focus on preparing Ghost Payne for the race of his life, while knowing that everything we'd worked for could be stripped away by a judge's gavel. It was like trying to train for the Olympics while waiting for the results of a cancer test. But maybe that was the point. Maybe Dad had known that the only way to truly prove myself was to face everything at once. The horse race, the family betrayal, the legal battle, and the weight of carrying on his legacy. If I could handle all of that and still find a way to win, then maybe I'd finally earn the right to call myself Tom Reed's son. The night before we were scheduled to leave for Kentucky, I stood in Ghost Paint's stall, running my hands along his neck and feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls and the distant hum of traffic on the highway. Tomorrow we're not just running for dreams, Ghost, I whispered to him. We're running for freedom, for honor, for the chance to prove that not everything in this world can be measured in dollars, and that real legacy isn't about paperwork. It's about what you leave behind in people's hearts. My dad had left me Ghost Paint, and now we were going to show the world what that gift was really worth. I could see Kentucky on the horizon, both literally and figuratively. The biggest race in American horse racing was waiting for us, along with the biggest payday either of us had ever imagined. But more than that, it represented the chance to rebuild everything that had been torn down, to prove that sometimes the longest shots really do come in. We were going to build something beautiful from the ruins of what had been destroyed. This was our moment, our last breath before the storm hit, and I had never felt more ready for a fight in my entire life. The morning air at Churchill Downs was thick with possibility, and the smell of fresh coffee mixing with morning dew. Kentucky in May is something special, the kind of place where legends are born and dreams either soar like eagles or crash like meteors. I stood there watching the early crowd filter in, dressed in their finest derby attire, fancy hats and bow ties that looked like they'd stepped off the pages of Southern Living magazine. This was it, the place where legends are made. And I, Logan Reed, was standing right on the edge of my own legend, wondering if I was about to write the greatest comeback story in racing history, or the most expensive failure. My heart was pounding like a caged Mustang trying to break free. Every nerve in my body was strung tight as a banjo string, vibrating with anticipation and pure, undiluted terror. Martha and Raoul found me by the paddock, both wearing expressions that somehow managed to be calm and excited at the same time. Martha looked like she was dressed for church, which I guess in a way, this was her temple, and Ghost Paint was her prayer made flesh. You ready for this, son? Martha asked, her weathered hands steady as rocks. Raoul nodded toward the track, where they were setting up for the morning workouts. He's as ready as he'll ever be. The question is, are you? I wanted to tell them I felt like I was about to jump out of an airplane, without checking if my parachute was packed properly. Instead, I just nodded and tried to look like a man who belonged here. At 9 o'clock sharp, we huddled around a laptop in a small room behind the grandstand, connected to a Zoom call that would determine whether I even had the right to be here. Judge Castellanos appeared on screen, her expression as unreadable as a poker player holding a royal flush. After reviewing all evidence submitted, she began, her voice cutting through the static like a blade, including the gift deed signed by Thomas Reed and video evidence of deliberate sabotage by the defending Cole Reed. This court rules that the lawsuit filed by Cole Reed regarding future earnings from the horse Ghost Paint is hereby dismissed. Ghost Paint remains the exclusive property of Mr. Logan Reed. Case closed. Gift horse, no returns. The breath I didn't realize I'd been holding came rushing out like air from a punctured tire. It felt like a massive boulder had just rolled off my shoulders and crashed into Kentucky bluegrass. My honor was restored. Ghost Paint's honor was restored. This was the first bell in a doubleheader fight, and we'd already won round one. Martha squeezed my shoulder with hands that had seen 50 years of victories and defeats. One down, cowboy. Now let's go win the big one. But even as relief flooded through me, I knew this was only half the battle. The real test was still waiting for us on that track, where 15 of the fastest horses in America were getting ready to run the race of their lives. By 6:22 p.m., Churchill Downs was packed tighter than a can of sardines. The crowd was a sea of colorful hats, mint juleps, and nervous energy that you could practically taste in the air. The sun was starting to hang low in Kentucky's sky, painting everything in that golden light that makes even the ugliest things look beautiful. Ghost Paint looked calm in the paddock, almost serene, like he was meditating before the biggest moment of his life. His coat gleamed like polished copper, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there months ago. Confidence, maybe, or just a quiet knowledge that he belonged here. The track announcer's voice boomed across the facility as the horses began their parade to the starting gate. And they're approaching the gate for the 150th running of the Kentucky Derby. In the number 7 position, we have Ghost Paint, the 15-year-old long shot ridden by jockey Miguel Santos. 15-1 odds. The betting public had spoken, and they'd basically written us off as a feel-good story that would finish somewhere in the middle of the pack. But I'd learned not to trust the wisdom of crowds when it came to counting out the underdog. The gates flew open with that metallic crash that sounds like thunder, and 20 horses exploded onto the track like they'd been shot from cannons. Ghost Paint started exactly where I expected him to, 7th place, loping along like he was out for a Sunday ride, while the younger horses burned rubber, trying to establish early position. My heart clenched watching him fall behind, but I knew his game plan by now. He was like an experienced poker player, waiting for the right moment to show his cards. "Come on, old man," I whispered under my breath. "Show them what you've got." The first turn came and went, and Ghost Paint was still sitting in 7th, patient as a saint, while the frontrunner started to feel the pressure of setting the pace. Then, as they hit the backstretch, something magical started to happen. With about 800 meters to go, when the other horses were beginning to show signs of fatigue, Ghost Paint suddenly found that hidden gear we'd glimpsed in training. Miguel moved him to the outside, and my old horse transformed from a comfortable cruiser into a heat-seeking missile locked onto the finish line. This wasn't just running. This was poetry in motion. This was hope and endurance and unbreakable spirit, all wrapped up in 1,200 pounds of muscle and determination. He was like a forgotten song that suddenly remembered how to sing at full volume. One by one, Ghost Paint began picking off horses like they were standing still. 8th to 6th, 6th to 4th. The crowd started to notice, their cheers rising to a roar as this impossible story unfolded right in front of their eyes. With 200 meters to go, there were only 2 horses ahead of him. Lightning Strike, the favorite, and a 3-year-old named Thunder Valley, who'd been leading for most of the race. Ghost Paint is making his move, the track announcer screamed, his professional composure completely gone. This 15-year-old veteran is running like he's 5 years old again. The final furlong was pure magic. Ghost Paint flew past Thunder Valley like the younger horse was moving through molasses. Now it was just him and Lightning Strike, nose to nose, stride for stride, in a photo finish that would be talked about for decades. They crossed the line together, so close that even the high-speed cameras would need time to separate them. The crowd held its breath. I held mine too. Then the announcement came. Official result. Ghost Paint wins by 3/4 of a length. Time, 1 minute and 59.99 seconds. The world exploded. And just like that, a forgotten horse and a rejected son rewrote history in under 2 minutes. I felt my legs give out as the full weight of what had just happened hit me, like a freight train carrying pure joy. We'd done it. Against all odds, against all logic, against every expert who'd written us off. We'd actually done it. Everything we'd fought for, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and pain and desperate hope, it had all been worth it. Cowboys don't quit, and neither did my horse. The press conference afterward was a blur of camera flashes and shouted questions. The officials made it sound like they were announcing the winner of the lottery and the Nobel Prize all at once. To the winner of the Kentucky Derby, Ghost Paint, and his owner Logan Reed, we present the winner's purse of $1,860,000. Additional sponsor bonuses from Nutrina and Wrangler bring the total to $640,000. The announcer paused for dramatic effect. Total earnings, $2,500,000. $2.5 million. Enough to pay off every debt, buy back the ranch, and finally be free from any bank or creditor telling me what I could or couldn't do with my life. Now the bank no longer had power. Now I was the law on my own land. And it cost exactly $700,000 and 20 years of pain. I was basking in that golden moment, fielding congratulations and trying to process the magnitude of what we'd accomplished, when the celebration came to a screeching halt. Cole appeared at the press conference like a ghost at a wedding, his face pale as milk and his eyes burning with the kind of rage that makes sane people cross the street. Security tried to stop him, but he pushed through like a man possessed. "Horse is juiced," he screamed, his voice cutting to the celebration like a rusty knife. "This horse is on steroids. It's all fake. You're all being played. There's no way a 15-year-old horse runs like that clean." The room erupted into chaos. Cameras spun toward Cole like sunflowers following the sun. Reporters shouted questions. Security moved in. I felt like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over my head at the exact moment I'd been feeling the warmest. His words weren't just an attack on my horse. They were an attack on everything we'd built, everything we'd proven, everything we'd fought to achieve. Cole was like a poisonous snake that had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike when it would hurt the most. "You haven't taken everything, Cole. You took my ranch, but you didn't take my spirit. You're trying to take my victory now, but I won't let you have it. This is just another challenge, and I accept it." The next 5 days were the longest of my life. Nobody called with congratulations anymore. ESPN canceled a planned feature. One of our sponsors froze their bonus payment pending the investigation. This wasn't just Cole's statement. This was a bomb that threatened to destroy everything we'd built. I spent those days pacing around Raul's facility like a caged animal, watching Ghost Paint graze peacefully in his paddock, completely unaware that his reputation was being dragged to the mud on every sports talk show in America. When the official from UC Davis finally appeared with the envelope containing Ghost Paint's drug test results, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might actually explode. Blood and urine samples from Ghost Paint have been tested using the most advanced screening methods available, he announced. Result: negative for all anabolic agents, stimulants, and performance-enhancing substances. The horse is completely clean. The relief that washed over me was like a dam bursting. My honor was restored. Ghost Paint's honor was restored. Martha was standing beside me, and I saw her wipe her eyes. "I knew that horse still had fire in him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But to do it like this? Lord, Tom would be so proud." Raul just smiled and shook his head. Sometimes the best medicine is just believing in what's already there. But I wasn't done. Cole had thrown the first punch, but I was going to throw the last one. I sued Cole for defamation, and without a shred of evidence to back up his claims, he folded faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. He agreed to pay me $90,000 in damages and publish a public apology in several major newspapers. The apology was as dry and lifeless as last year's hay, but it was official. I, Cole Reed, publicly apologized to Logan Reed and the owner of Ghost Paint for my unfounded accusations. This wasn't about the money. This was about principle. He had to admit he was wrong. A month after the victory, when the dust had finally settled and Ghost Paint was enjoying the quiet of the pasture, I made the most important purchase of my life. I bought back 51% of Red Mesa Ranch for $700,000. Cole's gambling debts and poor management had forced the bank to sell, and I was there to catch it when it fell. Coming home felt like putting on a favorite shirt after years of wearing clothes that never quite fit. Then I created the Second Stride Hearts Foundation with $500,000, dedicated to equine therapy for children with cerebral palsy and other physical challenges. Ghost Paint had given me a second chance, and now I wanted to give that same opportunity to others. The rest of the money went into ranch improvements, new equipment, and a trust fund that would ensure Ghost Paint could live out his days in comfort as our therapy program's honorary guide horse. But the hardest decision was yet to come. For weeks, I wrestled with what to do about Cole. I could have gotten revenge, could have destroyed him in the press the way he tried to destroy me. But as Dad used to say, real victory is having the power to finish an enemy and choosing not to. I talked it over with Martha, who was as direct as always. "You sure about this, Logan? You can't change a wolf unless he wants to be changed. Just promise me you won't let him bite you twice." "I know, Martha, but he's my brother, and maybe this is his last chance. Maybe it's ours too." After everything that had happened, I offered Cole a job as the ranch's financial director, with full audit oversight and strict conditions. Cole didn't answer right away. His eyes filled with shame I'd never seen before. The public humiliation had broken something in him. Maybe the part that had always felt entitled to more than he'd earned. He accepted, reluctantly, understanding that this was his last chance to be part of something instead of trying to tear it down. It was a start, not a happy ending. But beginning, the sun was setting over Red Mesa Ranch as I sat on Ghost Paint. Not as a jockey, but as a friend, just listening to this living legend breathe. Golden light fell across the fields, highlighting the new fences and freshly painted barns. My father didn't just leave me an old horse. He left me a lesson about what real inheritance means. Ghost Paint wasn't just a horse. He was my guide, my conscience, my bridge to a future I never could have imagined. He left me a horse, and I'm leaving him a chance. Sometimes the best stories are the ones nobody sees coming.